Okay, so today we're going to be looking at and comparing Drip to ActiveCampaign. Now, I haven't actually used Drip a lot for a lot of other clients because it's actually not that popular a system compared to ActiveCampaign. Everyone seems to be using ActiveCampaign, Mailchimp, Infusionsoft, or Entreport. They're kind of the main systems that most people use. Drip came about because lead pages wanted to have their own email marketing system, and so or one of their developers wanted to build one, and so they basically created Drip, and that was a couple of years ago, maybe 5 or 6 years ago. And so they're fairly new to the email marketing space, but they have got some great features, and they do pretty closely compare to ActiveCampaign. There's a lot of things that are very similar. So I'll take you through just a few things that I like about Drip, a few things that I hate about Drip, and how it compares to ActiveCampaign. So first up, let's have a look at the people. Now, I've just got my contact in here so we can sort of see how that looks. I'm not in love with their person page. To me, it's just very simple and empty almost, and that's probably because I don't have a lot of data in here. But even if I did have data, this is just how many email sessions, orders got sent, etc. Just a bar chart, and I've got some basic sort of details here on like what web sessions I've had, what emails I've been sent, what workflows, etc. And it's just it's all right. If you just want a really simple profile to look at, it's okay. I'm not a fan of their sort of like modern, super clean, super empty sort of styling. I think that actually makes it a little bit harder to find certain information on the page because it's not sort of in blocks of information. Then here again on the page, you can see that even though I've got now a name in there, it doesn't automatically update the page. I have to manually refresh the page. And so that's just like little quirks that I am not particularly in love with for their system. Adding tags and things, pretty simple sort of system to do that. Custom fields, we can add custom fields here. And that's one thing that I do like about Drip, in that it doesn't force you into having any fields. It basically just it creates the field. So even though you've got these fields here, it's not going to create these fields until you actually get data coming into those fields. Those fields don't really exist yet because there's no data in them. And so here we've got the field identifiers, right? And if I add address in here of 41 and update that field there, and then I refresh this, and we go back to our profile, go to our custom fields, we'll now get address 1. So it actually creates this field as soon as there's data in it, which I actually do like about their system, because a lot of these other systems, they have hundreds of system fields, and they just come stock standard with those fields. Like Infusionsoft is really bad for that. Entreport, HubSpot is probably the worst for that. And it comes with like 200 system fields that you never ever use, and it just clogs up their system and it makes it really cumbersome to work with. And from a developer's point of view, you have to kind of sift through 200 fields just to find that one that you want to find. And even from your point of view, if you ever are using their API or trying to connect something to your system here, then you're going to have to sift through all those fields as well. And there might be like 10 different types of address fields, postal address, delivery address, secondary address, home address, office address. Like, some of these systems are just stupid with the fields that they have. So I'm a big fan of not having fields until you need them, until you actually use them. And that's what Drip does. ActiveCampaign, they basically just have 4 fields that come standard. They have phone, email, first and last name. So again, nice and simple, and they're all up the top here. I do prefer ActiveCampaign's contact page. I just think it looks a little bit better. It's easier to navigate. They've got these blocks of data and sort of recent activities, etc. So it's sort of more in blocks that you can quickly glance at, whereas Drip's system is kind of all hidden away until you click somewhere to open it up. Now, there's perks for both systems, but that's just my personal preference. The people with the the lists in Drip. I do like how it comes with some segments already created for you. And of course, you can create your own segments if you like. And we can create these based on a whole range of filters, whether they've got emails, haven't received emails, opened, etc., visited web page. So they've got pretty much all the same filters as what ActiveCampaign has. ActiveCampaign does have a few additional filters than what Drip do, but they are pretty close to being exactly the same. So not much of a difference between those. Then we've got the automations. Now, in Drip, we've got 3 different types of automations, and Drip has been built more so or more similar to Infusionsoft than it is to ActiveCampaign in this respect. So with Infusionsoft, you have what are called, I think they're called marketing campaigns or something like that in Infusionsoft. In Drip, they're called workflows, and essentially a workflow is the main campaign that someone is going to go through. And a workflow itself doesn't actually send any emails. The emails are sent in a campaign. A campaign is just a series of emails towards a goal. Now, in ActiveCampaign, they don't sort of block you into building out your automations in any particular way. These automations, you can build automations that are rules, campaigns, or workflows however you like, merge them together however you like, mix them up however you like, so that they work for whatever makes sense to you. I love that for ActiveCampaign because it's so flexible in that you're not locked into something that you don't particularly like or understand, or it just doesn't sort of gel well with how you want the logic to work. ActiveCampaign, you can just customize it to whatever you like, and whatever makes sense to you is whatever you'll set up in here. In Drip, however, you have to sort of sit within their framework. And so they've got the framework here starting with workflows, and say we're going to create a workflow here of our welcome workflow. And this is going to start when the tag test is applied, and we're going to trigger this provided that the people that are triggering it have never been in this workflow before. Drip is very kind of pretty looking, and some people will like that. I personally find it a little bit distracting from when I'm creating things and working inside Drip. It's too user-friendly to me, like they've tried to pretty it up too much. And that, to me, just sort of distracts from building out those workflows and takes a little bit longer because you've got these sort of like, it's a small little thing, but you've got that little sort of lag where they've got that transition where this sort of pop-up sort of drags across the screen a little bit. And if you're building out, 10, 20, 30 different automations in an afternoon, that little drag does start to get quite annoying because you watch it every time. It's like watching the same skit every 5 seconds when you're doing something in here. Now, they also have a couple of things that I really don't see a point of, like this one here, the parallel paths. Yeah, not sure why you would need a parallel path. ActiveCampaign, they have split paths, but users only go down one or the other path. Parallel paths doesn't really make a lot of sense because unless you're sort of waiting, I suppose, on one path and not waiting on the other, but they've got to merge up again later at some point. So you might as well just do like a split, or a different automation really would accomplish the same thing. So yeah, that's just a little bit confusing to me because you've got one person here and then they're going down both paths at the same time. And then this path here, maybe you're waiting 5 days before they enter this workflow. And then this one here, you're entering another workflow in that sort of 5-day period. But most people would never use this sort of double path thing. It just wouldn't make sense. You just build it as a straight line. They enter workflow 1, wait 5 days, enter workflow 2, and then move on. Now, they do have a few other things here, like the decision tree. That's pretty much the same in ActiveCampaign of their if-else module. So we'll have a look here. And they've got their conditions and workflow. If-else is their comparison here. They're pretty much exactly the same. There's not a lot difference between those. The goal, ActiveCampaign has that as well. Split testing, same sort of logic, and exit, same logic there. The action step in Drip is where you'd actually send them to start, and see that little lag there? Makes me click it twice because there's that little lag and I think I haven't clicked it. And so it does start to get a little annoying when you're building out these things. So what we've got here is we've got the action module, and we're going to send them on a. We're going to drip them. So an action within Drip. You've got actions in other systems as well, like Facebook, add them to audiences, etc. Pipedrive, you can send a person to Pipedrive, Salesforce. So ActiveCampaign has a lot of those systems built in as well. They're called CX apps. They've got Salesforce here. I think Facebook is under contacts here. So they have similar sort of integrations. To be honest, most of the time, I never use these built-in audit integrations because they're so basic that if you know how to code an API, this is just going to do a very simple thing of like moving a person from Drip to the other system, and it's just a one-way sync. Most of the time, you want to have a two-way sync, so that's a bit pointless in itself. And then two, most of the time when you're moving it from one system of Drip to the other system, you want to know why you're moving that person across. Maybe they have completed a call with you, maybe they've paid an invoice, etc. And so you want to sort of have some additional data moving across to the next system, like a tag or a custom field being filled in with a certain value, so that in the other system, you can then interpret that and then automate whatever is coming up in the process next. So I don't usually use any of these built-in things. The main actions that you will be using are in Drip, and I really don't like how they've sort of grouped it here, but that is what it is. You can add tags, deactivate persons, delete person, etc. Flag them as prospects, which is kind of getting on the deals level. And then really the main one that you will be using is sending a campaign, restarting a campaign, and removing from a campaign. That's kind of where you're sending emails. So here we've got our campaign, and a campaign in Drip is a sequence of emails. Now, in ActiveCampaign, if you didn't want to do that sort of embedding of a campaign within an automation, then you can just build it out so it's all in one automation if that's what makes sense to you. There's nothing stopping you from doing that. That's not the best way to do it, but plenty of people do it that way and build their entire businesses just in one automation. I am a fan of building out these sort of straight line automations, which is essentially a campaign in Drip speak. Then we've got a few other options here of like restarting the campaign when this action fires. So if they're already in that campaign, then take them all the way up to the top, restart them again from the top. So you can sort of do different things here. And that's really just saving a step, because in ActiveCampaign, to restart them on a campaign, on an automation, you end them in that automation and then you start them in that same automation again. And so that's a restart. Here you can just do it in one step. I don't really do that very often, so there's not really a point to have it as an option here. You could just do the two actions. Sending campaign emails until a goal is, even if a goal is achieved. I do like that option. That's something that ActiveCampaign doesn't have. But ActiveCampaign, you can just not have a goal within this automation. And essentially, that's just always going to happen. All the emails in that automation, when someone enters an automation in ActiveCampaign, they're just going to go from the top to the bottom, regardless of whatever's happening in any other automation, provided that those other automations aren't removing them from this automation or achieving a goal within this automation here. That would end them. That's the two ways that you end someone in an automation. Either they achieve a goal or they exit the automation. And if they're achieving a goal, then the goal has to be inside the automation. So you have to put a goal in here like this, and then we'll just call this goal the whatever goal. We have to add a condition to save it, so I'm just going to put a tag in here and checkout completed. Great. So now we've got this goal here, and essentially how that works is if they're in this automation at any step, they achieve this goal, which means they get the tag checkout completed, then they just jump to this goal. So here you can decide, well, do we want to send some more emails? Do we want to start them on another automation? Do we want to just end this automation? Which is normally what I do, because normally I have the goal as the end, and then I have another automation triggering separately that's using the same tag or whatever I'm using here to trigger that separate automation up the top. So that's how I generally build them. So yeah, you don't really need that sort of logic there, but it is cool that they've thought about those sort of things in their system. So that's their actions. Let's have a look if they've got an SMS in here. I don't think they do. Custom events, yeah, I haven't really used that very much. HTTP posts, that's really where you'd be sending webhooks and things across to different systems, sending one-off emails, custom fields, etc. Unsubscribing. I'm just seeing if they've got SMS built in, but none of these other systems, to my knowledge, do SMS. Demio, yeah. So it doesn't look like they've got SMS built in, which that's something that ActiveCampaign does have built in. I don't personally use it. There's another little hack that I've got to work around that for various reasons. Feel free to watch that video. But building out this automation in both systems, pretty similar to each other. They're much of a muchness. I do prefer ActiveCampaign because it has that flexibility. Whereas here in Drip, you are locked into workflows, campaigns, and what they call rules, which are basically just very simple workflows. I'll show you that in a second. So the campaigns is basically a sequence of emails. And you can see here that you can edit the emails, and the email editor in Drip is really basic. It's really basic. So here's the email editor, text editor. You can add an image, put the image in, and the image that I uploaded was way too big, and there's you can double click on it here and then change the image properties if you like. So we could change it to like 500 wide, for instance, and that's it. But there's no way to like do columns and things in here and add in all these other sort of awesome things that ActiveCampaign have built in, like social icons and what else they got? Buttons, videos, RSS feeds, custom HTML blocks, abandoned cart modules, etc. So that's all built in with ActiveCampaign. In Drip, you are kind of just constrained to this very, very simple email editor, which is good in many ways because if you over edit your emails, if you create these beautiful, fancy emails, they're just going to go to spam. So there is some benefits of just locking you into this system, but most people are probably going to hate it because it's so basic and it just doesn't look as sexy as ActiveCampaign's polished, finished email. So that's the emails. Then in here we've got the forms, which we can directly create a form within a campaign, and then when someone submits that form, they're going to start that campaign and kind of skip going to a workflow first. So that's sort of where you start to get a little bit of confusion in Drip because they could submit the form, get a tag, the tag could then trigger a workflow, and then the form submit could also trigger this campaign, and so now you've got two things running at the same time. And then depending on what settings and filters here you've got in the workflow, they may start that campaign a second time and you start getting double ups and things. So it is a little bit harder to understand the logic here and unravel it if you sort of build out the system in different sort of ways. ActiveCampaign, it's very customizable and it's very modular. So they've only got one place that you create forms. They've only got one type of automation that you create, and you can really create the most simple automation or the most complex automation, doesn't matter. Here in Drip, we've got these things called rules. And a rule is essentially just a two-step automation. So you've got, here's our trigger. What happens when this trigger happens? This happens. So when the tag remove is applied, then we just deactivate the person. Now we can add, of course, more actions and more triggers for this particular rule. But essentially, you can just build the same thing in ActiveCampaign's automation and just, this is what I would call a system automation when I'm doing the naming here. It's a system automation because it keeps your system working and clean, keeps the data clean. And that's essentially what a rule is here. But I can see why they needed to add this in. But in ActiveCampaign, you can just build ActiveCampaign out however you like to do whatever you want. So that's why I like ActiveCampaign. Then you've got broadcasts, which I'm not going to really go into a lot of detail here. It is a great system for broadcasts. Both ActiveCampaign and Drip are very similar, not a lot of difference between them. The forms in Drip, I do actually prefer these because they are pretty nice looking forms. I'm not a big fan of having these forms built out in these email marketing systems, but if you are going to build them, Drip does have a nicer form builder. Now, one thing that I did notice with Drip is that if you don't have any data inside of Drip for those fields, so like the first name field, last name field, etc., if you haven't imported any contacts, then you're not going to be able to select the field that the data goes to. So all fields except for the email field in Drip are a custom field. So the first name, last name, phone, address field, they're all custom fields in the logic that Drip uses. The only required field is the email field. And so everything else is custom. And so when I was building this form prior to the video, I was really confused because I just couldn't for the life of me figure out how to add the name to the form. You know, how do I add a name field to this form? And it's because the fields didn't exist. I didn't have these three fields. I didn't have any fields in here actually. I just had the email address, which is required always, and there was nothing in here. So I couldn't select that, you know, I wanted to add a first name field, for instance. But now that I'm back here, I can see that, okay, those fields have been created, and now I can select from them and use them in my form. So that's just something to, you know, watch out for when you're building out forms. You have to have data in the fields that you want to map to from the form. So you kind of have to work backwards in a sense to build out your form. Anyway, the form itself is pretty nice looking. This is a pop-up form. The design builder, pretty good. Yeah, not too bad. You are constrained a little bit in what you can do with the design builder here. You know, you can't do really fancy forms and things. You have to kind of stick within their framework. But you know, their framework's pretty good. You know, like for instance, you wouldn't be able to, you know, put like a big border around and do like a flashy thing on the right and whatever else. Put like, you know, different background here to a background over there. So you are going to be constrained with their builder, but it's much sexier than ActiveCampaign's. ActiveCampaign forms are pretty funny. They're very basic. And ActiveCampaign, like here's a finished form for ActiveCampaign, like this. You know, very, very simple. It's essentially just a HTML form. And when you export these to your website, you have the option of just exporting the whole form with all the code. And that allows you to heavily customize that form using CSS or HTML. And then you can customize the form to an extent and make it really fit into the site. However, you do need to know how to coding custom in CSS and HTML to understand that, which most people don't. So that's why I just generally build forms with other form builders like Gravity Forms, Drop Forms, Type Forms. There's hundreds of form builders out there that do a great job, and they all integrate with ActiveCampaign or they integrate with Zapier, which every form builder these days will integrate with Zapier essentially, or at least have an API. So yeah, simple form. You've got a little thank you page here, but we can redirect if we wanted to a different page. Nothing different to ActiveCampaign, really. Their thank you is a little bit nicer by default. And then we can also send the submission event to Google Analytics, which is nice. Google Analytics does pick up form submissions anyway from your website, provided that you are basically sending them across. So if you've got the code set up correctly on your site, then it's going to pick up the form submission anyway, because it's a JavaScript. So that's not really needed. Then we've got templates, email templates. Yeah, pretty good. Nothing really fancy there. ActiveCampaign templates are the same. And then analytics. Now, the analytics in Drip are pretty good. They have, great analytics. They do try and make it look too pretty. Like I'm a fan of just these sort of CSV type analytics where you've just got a big pile of data that you can really drill into versus these like pretty dashboard type analytics where you can't really drill into it very much, where you're kind of constrained to whatever they think that you're wanting to see for like, this sort of stuff. I much prefer just to export all the data, then I can do whatever I want with it and figure out whatever I want from it. So this is fine, but it's not the best. ActiveCampaign's data, it's getting better. They do have a whole range of reports in here that are great for pulling out data. It does take a little bit of time to load each of these reports because there's a lot of data to sift through. And I do find that their reporting is probably their weakest link. There's a lot of strong points to ActiveCampaign, but their reports, they're among the weaker parts. But they have, in the last couple of months, really added a lot of depth to their reports. They've updated the API so you can get more data out. They've added maybe 6 to 12 new reports here in the dashboard, and those reports are going to be pulling out a lot more data than what we had previously. And much to my happiness, they're using this sort of CSV style where it's just data dumped out in front of you, and you can decide what you want to do with that data. You can export it and then, manipulate it or whatever in your own data analyst system. So both of those, much of a muchness. I do prefer ActiveCampaign. Now, that's pretty much Drip's features in a nutshell. It's a great system. It's priced pretty similarly to ActiveCampaign. It is a little bit more sort of friendly looking, pretty looking than ActiveCampaign is, but it also misses a few features. So in ActiveCampaign, a couple of things that Drip doesn't have. ActiveCampaign has scoring built in, which is great if you have really high value leads and you're getting too many leads to sort of filter out manually. Scoring will help you decide who you should be focusing on. Then we've got things like built-in list cleanup, database syncing. That's really good if you need to sync up with different lists. Then we've got global variables. So we can set like a signature that we're using and then use that variable in all of our emails. And then we just have to then update that signature variable one time in the future, and then it will update all the signatures on all the emails where that variable is used. So we can use, and there's an unlimited quantity of global variables that you can create. So that's a really powerful feature that I use all the time for logos and footers inside of emails. The automation builder, I prefer this to Drips just because it's got that huge amount of flexibility. They've got automation maps, which are pretty good if you're linking automations with the start-stop modules for different automations. The CRM, I don't really use, so I'm not really going to go into it. Pipedrive is a much better CRM, and that's what I recommend. Conversations, that's a new feature that they added. It's okay. I'm not a big fan of it. It's kind of one of those like pretty features that people sign up for but then never use. There's much better conversation systems out there, ManyChat and all those sort of things. Then we've also got the option of creating landing pages in here and also doing some advanced site tracking. The landing pages feature was only added maybe a month or two ago, and so that's sort of still got some bugs in it, but it is looking pretty promising, and we'll probably get some better features for that coming forward. Site tracking is great if you want to trigger things to happen when people visit different pages on your site. You can do that. And then the web personalization is part of the pages, and that's really a strong suit of those landing pages. So someone could come to a landing page from an email, and then you could pre-fill on that page something like their name up the top in the title. Like here's my home page when it loads up. There it is. And I could pre-fill your name or your business name here in the title, and that way when you come to the page it will say business automation for Sally shoes or John's jackets or whatever. So that will sort of help you with your conversions a little bit better, because people are feeling like it's a little bit more like, normally you wouldn't use their name because that would be a little bit creepy, but you might pre-fill it to like business automation for e-commerce stores, for instance, when you know that they're an e-commerce store. And so that does help increase your conversions because you are personalizing the experience for them using those landing pages. And so that's something that I'm really excited to explore with ActiveCampaign. Drip doesn't have it, but maybe they'll add it in the future. So they are pretty similar services. I, of course, lean towards ActiveCampaign, but now that I've used Drip and played around with that for a little bit, it's actually a pretty good system. I'm pretty impressed with Drip and what they've been able to put together in the last few years, and I don't see any major issues with it aside from the fields not being there to begin with. But most people probably won't notice that because they import a list. Usually, it's the first step. And the rest of it, the automation workflows, that's a little bit confusing for some people, but it is they've got everything there that you'd want to use for the workflows. And their API is pretty good. ActiveCampaign's API is certainly better than Drip's. It's a lot easier to use, has a lot more modules, you can do a lot more with it. But Drip's API is pretty good, and for most people, that'd be fine as well. So all up, I'd say Drip is like a 6 or 7 out of 10. ActiveCampaign's probably around an 8 out of 10. Certainly some room for improvement on both systems. I do prefer ActiveCampaign, and that's the one that I recommend that you use.